George Harter, a seasoned product management expert with over 20 years of experience across industries like healthcare, finance, and legal. From navigating leadership challenges to the future of AI and product management, George shares invaluable insights that every PM and business leader needs to hear.
George, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Akash. Thanks for inviting me.
George and I have been friends now for a little over half a year. He's one of the few really experienced product managers in the Triangle in North Carolina. You've worked in legal, healthcare, financial products. The majority of product content creators aren't from these fields, though. And when I look at the data, a lot of product managers are from these fields. What do you think is the disconnect?
Well, every company now is an IT company, whether they want to be or not, right? Every company has to communicate with their customers. They have to communicate with each other, and they end up building software applications. And if you're going to build software, you need product management.
So it's really every company is becoming a tech company. That makes sense. But what I don't understand is why the PMs in financial services or the PMs in legal or the PMs in healthcare, why they don't have a more prominent profile. Like the PMs you do see, they come from Airbnb like Lenny, or they come from Stripe and Google like Shreyas.
I think some of that has to do with that product management as a discipline was created out west. It was created in Silicon Valley, where the tech companies are. And of course, therefore, it's a much more mature job out there with the tech companies than it is in these newer companies. I was at LabCourse starting about 15 years ago, and they were just putting together product managers as a job position. So, Silicon Valley has, and the tech industry has probably 15, 20 more years experience.
And how does that trickle down into how product management is practiced? Is it pretty different from the books and what the creators are talking about?
The practice at the individual and the team level, and potentially all the way up to a chief product officer, is similar to how it's practiced in the more experienced, more advanced tech companies. But the big difference is that at a tech company, your CEO is a tech person. They understand technology. They care mostly about technology. If you go to any of these other industries and you're working in their technical side of the business, that is not their business. You are a supporting department. And so the CEOs care about finance or healthcare or legal, and they don't completely understand and don't care as much about the technology that supports their broader business.
So it reminds me of how tech teams often used to be called like IT.
Yeah. That term is still used, even if we're creating products in support of the bigger product or service that the company delivers.
Got it. And specifically within legal, healthcare, and fintech, I'm curious, or more broadly financial products, like what are the differences from each other in those three disciplines and how product management is practiced?
Sure. Now, I was at Fidelity, and Fidelity is a successful, wealthy, industry leading company. And so they had a very fleshed out type of IT infrastructure and IT organization. I don't think they were as advanced as, say, some of those big tech companies, but they certainly were very advanced in their techniques and methodologies when compared to non-tech companies. And the other businesses, when I was at LexisNexis, they were just buying a bunch of different software companies and pulling them together into a software suite kind of product offering. So it just hasn't been that many years, certainly 15 to 18 years, where these big non-tech companies have learned that tech is important to every industry.
This episode is brought to you by Adio, the next generation CRM. Imagine a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and actually intuitive. Adio makes that a reality. As I've profiled in the Product Growth newsletter, setting up Adio takes less than a minute, and within seconds of syncing your email and calendar, You'll see your relationships in one place, enriched with valuable data, including things like relationship strength. ADIO lets you build Zapier-style automations, create powerful reports, and works for any go-to-market motion, from PLG to sales-led. ADIO is designed for the next era of companies like yours. And companies like yours shouldn't have to deal with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRMs. Join industry leaders like 11 Labs, Replicate, and Modal. Head to adio.com/product growth and you'll get 15% off your first year. That's attio.com/product growth. This episode is brought to you by Sprig. What if product teams knew exactly what to build to reach their goals? From increasing conversion to boosting engagement, these challenges require a deep understanding of your users, something we can't get from product analytics alone. Meet Sprig, a product experience platform that generates AI-powered opportunities to continuously improve your product at scale. First, Sprig captures your product experience in real time through heat maps, replays, surveys, and feedback studies. Then, Sprig's industry-leading AI instantly analyzes all of your product experience data to generate real-time insights. Sprig AI goes even further with actionable product recommendations to drive revenue, retention, and user satisfaction. Join product teams at Figma and Notion by uncovering AI-powered product opportunities at scale. Visit sprig.com/product growth podcast to book a demo and get a $75 gift card. Okay, and when I talk to PMs day in, day out, I often talk to PMs who are job seeking. Those are the ones who are most interested in PM content, of course. And what I consistently hear is, okay, I might have gotten an interview. I might have even gotten a final round in some new industry. But then I always lose out to some candidate who had that industry experience. And I know that one of your hottest takes, we've talked about this a couple different times, is that you don't necessarily need industry experience, and you have successfully made that industry transition. So what are the product leaders hiring for these roles missing out on? Why is it that PMs can kind of switch industries more easily than those leaders might think?
I think there's two big factors. Number one is timing. So if you are good at the practice of product, but you don't have a specific industry experience, you want to be looking for a job when most other people are not looking for jobs, because it'll be much easier to get into that interview round and prove your worth to the hiring manager. What's happening right now is that if you don't have exactly, with 600 candidates for each position, if you don't have exactly the right experience and your resume doesn't go through the electronic processing and hit every single bullet that they're looking for, you're not going to get, maybe not even to a human in HR, much less to the hiring manager, right? 600 resumes, maybe 20 of them get to the hiring manager. So right now, I would say it's more important than ever to have industry experience and product management expertise. And the expertise is so that when you get into the interview, you can dazzle them with your knowledge of how to make great products.
And in your book, How to Build a Better Product Manager, the key skill set you really talk about as a huge differentiator is that PMs need to be the most knowledgeable about the users and the customers in the company. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So it's very important that a product manager is not just an order taker. So many people within the organization, and of course, every customer you have, and if you're selling to businesses, every user of your product at that customer org, all of these people have ideas of how you should improve your product. And every product manager in every industry deals with that. What you really need to do is make sure that you, as the product manager, can identify the great ideas as they come in. And in order to do that, I like to say you need to know your users like you know your best friends. If you're going out to lunch with a group of friends and one of them is running late, you can order lunch for him. You know what he likes to eat. You don't have to go back and do some more research to identify if a particular feature is right for that person. And I think product managers need that in their heads, because if you're sitting with your dev team and you've described a feature to them or a set of features or a new workflow that you may want to implement, and they start asking a lot of questions, which they should do and they will do, you need to be able to answer those questions from the point of view of the user and potentially of the customer, if the customer and user happen to be the same person, so that you end up being efficient with your time. If you always have to go back outside the meeting and validate your opinions, then things slow down and people lose trust in you.
I've seen that time and time again with the PMs is that they do slowly lose trust. And that happens in two layers. So layer one is that the designers and engineers that they work closely with to build product start to learn more about a particular product area. So an engineer, they might own the billing platform and have been working on the billing platform for 2 years. And then the product manager comes in and has some insight, but they actually know it more deeply, and then they start to lose trust. Similar with designers, designers might have actually designed the landing page, and then a product manager comes in and says, well, I did these 10 customer chats. So that's like layer one, where your own team loses trust. And then layer two is where like external teams lose trust. So customer success, they sit with customers all day. Sales, they talk to prospects all day. So I tend to find that PMs very easily can lose trust from either one of these two groups. How do they really build up their knowledge, build up their confidence to hold weight in these conversations and not make blunders?
I think it's very difficult to be an expert in all of the areas and in all of the points of view that you just mentioned. All those different jobs look at customers and users from a slightly different perspective. And some of them have insights that are difficult for you as product manager to get. For example, your support team, your customer service team, they're talking to a number of people every day who all have the same problem, because those problems tend to come in waves, right? So they're going to be the most knowledgeable on the pain that people who are willing to call in, that those customers have at that time. You're not going to be better experienced than they are on that very narrow situation. But what you can do is have more contact, more personal interaction with your users, so that you are the expert in also very specific areas of the communication with users. So you don't want to only catch users when they're having the problems and when they're upset and they're in the middle of it. It's important for a product manager to know the users like you know your friends. So see them with the good, see them with the bad, sit next to them while they're trying to use your product and understand what works well for them, what they're pleased with, and any frustrations that they run into. And that gives you a perspective that maybe your UX team would have from personal interviews. But when I am interviewing somebody as a product manager, I'm looking for something somewhat different than what a usability designer might be looking for.
Okay, so it's really about that representative understanding, not being kind of siloed in based on your data source, where sales, they're really focused on prospects, usually big customers especially, or whatever specialty of the market they're targeted in on. Customer success, they're focused on complaining users who are willing to reach out. And engineering design, they're probably focused on like the areas that they've built in the past. So a product manager needs to position themselves in terms of the problems that customers who are kind of in the most important areas of the business that they want to grow into are having.
That's right. I think of product management for a particular product in kind of two phases. Initially, you're creating a new product, and therefore you need to understand the broad need of a particular audience. Find your audience, understand the general need, because you're trying to build V1. And once you've got that minimum viable product out there, from that point on, you're talking about incremental improvements for that particular audience. What that means is mostly focusing on pain points. So everybody wants to tell you, everybody you meet as a product manager wants to tell you about, hey, I have a feature idea. I have a new feature you should implement. But But that's challenging because the people best capable of designing a feature is your own team, your developers, your designer, you who know the product and the workflows really well. And so it's best to bring problems to be solved to that team rather than solutions made up by somebody who might not be as experienced as your team is with the product.
Yeah, I thought this was a really core takeaway from your book for me. But where I kind of lose the ability to do this in practice sometimes is like your executives will come in, or a really high powered sales exec will come in and they'll kind of just give you a feature. What is the right way to reframe that from solutions and features to like core problems so that you can empower your design and engineering partners?
Yep. That experience happens. Somebody brings things to you, brings features to you from all of your constituents. But you're right. When an executive does it, it's important that the conversation you have with that executive makes sense to them. And so it's one of the reasons why I think it's important for a product manager to interview and survey frequently, even if you're already an expert on your target audience, because having recent data is very useful in debating a particular feature with an executive, because then it's not just your opinion, it's your opinion backed by data. So when an executive brings an idea to me, you want to take it seriously because they're in conversations that you're not in. They know the strategy of your company better than you probably do, or at least the future strategy of your company better than you probably do. And so I like to say, that's a great idea. I'd like to investigate it further. I want to know what problem you're trying to solve. And if they can't clearly articulate the problem, and maybe they can, then you want to drill down on, hey, who are some customers or users or a company that you heard is having this problem? I'd like to go investigate. And when I've talked it through with the team, I'm going to come back to you and recommend a certain course of action, a certain feature set. That seems to work well because they don't mind when you go away and do some work and come back with an idea.
Yeah, and especially if you do it quickly is what I found is like executives are always in a rush. They also seem to have like monkey lizard brain where they move from one topic to the next, every week. So if you can kind of get those customers from them and then reach out to those customers that day and then update them tomorrow that you've booked a meeting with that customer the day after. And then after you book the meeting, you just send them the insights right away. I feel like it's kind of creating that constant communication cadence with the exec that, oh man, George or Akash, like they clearly are proactive about listening and investigating my idea.
Yeah. And if you get really good at the process you just described, where you can do that efficiently and quickly and get feedback back to the executive, the level of trust they have in you skyrockets. And you will be put on more and more important projects, and you will be promoted ahead of peers because you will be more trusted by the executives. And it's just good process to be talking with your users and customers regularly.
Yeah, the one but that I always get from PMs is, but I have so many other things to do. Like I have to write my PRDs. My engineers have questions on their Jira tickets. My designer needs me to comment on this Figma file. My boss needs me to write this feature results write-up. It feels like we've piled on so many responsibilities to the product manager. Where does this one fit? How should one think about prioritizing?
I think it's number one. I think your primary responsibility as a product, think of all the other people who work on your team and more broadly in the company. Salespeople need to bring in new clients or maintain and grow existing clients. Support needs to solve immediate problems for existing customers. Development needs to make sure that what they build works and is bulletproof. And so the product manager is the only person in an organization whose job it is to solely make sure we build the right thing for our targeted audiences. So if you succeed at going to 12 meetings a day, and if you succeed at creating documents, but you fail at having the right content in those documents, then I think you've failed as a product manager. And unfortunately, because of all the factors that you just mentioned that affect a product manager's time and attention, we have lots of product managers that work almost entirely on feature requests, which may or may not be validated. Those end up in the pipeline, those end up in the product, and you develop a product that tends to be more confusing and disjointed than if you identify the problems, prioritize the problems, and then build something more cohesive.
I really like that. And what I like that you mentioned in an earlier answer is your operationalized process for how to reach out to customers and how frequently to reach out to customers. You and I have talked about this a couple times. It's also documented in your book, but can you walk it through for folks? Like, you have a specific process you do in terms of cadence and how many customers you talk to.
I do. So every time you take on, as a product manager, a new audience, whether that is you've moved to a new company, or you've taken on a new product, or you're adding a new significant feature set to an existing product that's going to appeal to a different targeted user, I think you need to do the user research, market research, in the same way you would do as if you were getting a new job. And what that means to me is 20 user interviews, and then a survey to prioritize what you hear in those interviews. And so what I would do, if I'm working with a sales team, I always go through the sales team to get my interviews. So, and I've worked primarily in business-related business-to-business software. So I would always go to the salespeople because it benefits the research, and it benefits you in a couple of huge ways. These interviews always go well because you are asking people, your customers, who may or may not have real problems that they feel, but you're asking for their opinion and you're asking for their observations, and you are showing concern about whether your product is serving them in an efficient way. People love that kind of attention. So I have never had a customer say that they didn't want to talk to me. I've had people say, I'm busy that month, I can't do it, please contact me another quarter. Great. But people want to talk about the problems they're having in a product that they use every day. So that means that when the salesperson calls the sales contact at that company, who is often not the end user, and says, hey, I want to bring my product manager out, or I want to set my product up for an interview with whoever one of your primary users is of this product, the salesperson is happy to do it because that is a friendly and happy interaction with their prospect. And at the end of it, when your interviewee is talking to their boss or their boss's boss, who might be the buyer of our product, and the boss says, how'd it go? And they say, oh, it was really good. They really listened to me. Well, that's great for the salesperson. That salesperson is going to be welcomed back the next time they go. And your salespeople, by the way, are always looking for a reason to talk to and meet with the client, a legit reason. They don't have to just make something up to try and have a touch point. So you've done your 20 interviews. You've each of them identified a handful of pain points, because your interviews are to focus on the pains, the problems. Just find them and identify them and define them so that you understand them as a product manager. Then you go out and you've got 20 interviews, and a lot of the pain points that people find are going to be overlapping. Many people will find the same pain point. So you might have 10, 15, or 20 pain points listed from 20 interviews. And the next thing you want to do is not just look at the list and go, oh, well, these 20 things, I think number 3 is the most important. It doesn't matter what you think. You're not in the target audience. You're the product manager. So then you need to validate and prioritize. So I like to make sure I make a survey. I prefer a rank ordering. I don't want to ask them their opinion on every item. I just want to know which one they think is most important and give me a rank ordered list from most painful to least painful. Because that is a very useful list as I try to put together my backlog. I now have pain points identified by users, and then prioritized by a larger set of users. And that prioritized list is exactly a backlog. So for the survey, I like to send out the list that I've curated a little bit so there's no duplicates to enough people so that I get at least 100 responses. And the reason I want to get 100 responses is not because that makes it statistically valid. You can get statistic validity around 42 or 47 responses, something like that. But anything over 100 sounds legit. When you go talk to execs and they say, well, how do you know this is the most important next thing to do? And you say, well, I interviewed 20. I surveyed 240. I got 138 responses. And they all agree that this is the order of priority for the pain points that they are feeling in our product. That's very hard to argue with.
So you build up this credibility through this process that you're talking to 20 customers and then you're serving 100. And how often do you update your understanding? Do you do this on a quarterly basis? Because I imagine there's like a never-ending demand for this type of update, but you can't just constantly be doing it.
Yep. And I think quarterly is right. And I can tell you that I have done this process well and I've done it poorly. And when I have done it poorly, I get in trouble talking to executives because they sometimes will call you out and say, well, how many customers did you ask? And if it's not recent information, that can be challenging. So I really do like quarterly. Quarterly does not have to be 20 customers. Remember, you're kind of reevaluating an opinion you already have about the target audience because you already spoke to 20. You have these personas in your head. You know them like you know your friends already, but you're validating their latest pain points. So I think quarterly, talk to 10. If it ends up only being 3 times a year, I think that's fine. But if an executive says, when's the last time you talked to customers about this? You don't want it to be a year ago. So about quarterly and talk to 10. Do the 100-person response survey again, and you will constantly have a set of features to put in the backlog, and you'll have good answers for your executive team and your broader team.
So one sort of counterintuitive tip we already covered is going through sales for these conversations. Another one you have is to do these in person and basically do like a week-long country tour where you're going around the country talking to people in person. Why is that more effective than Zoom?
Primary reason it's more effective is because you can see things when you're sitting next to a person about their body language and about their actions outside of the camera and outside of their computer screen. And there's an example that I use. I was sitting next to a medical assistant in a doctor's office when I was at LabCorp, and I was learning how they fit lab order entry and getting lab results and communicating those out to the practice. How do they fit that work into their day? How does our product fit into the other things they have to do? So, for example, at a small doctor's office, the person who might be entering that data for the doctor also has to respond to patients as they walk up to the front desk. And so that's something you wouldn't see if you were just watching their screen and watching their face. Body language. When people get uncomfortable, even if they're not willing to tell you of problems because they just met you, it's very helpful to see that they adjust their position and they get a little uncomfortable while they're going through. Or the most interesting one I saw was a woman was clicking through and she clicked on something and she just said, She just made a little grunt, little pursed lip sound. And I said, wait, what was that? And she goes, well, every time I do this, I always have to go back and back up and click this other thing for this to work. And, I took down that note, and you never know. That might be a tiny problem, but it's affecting 10,000 people. It might be the number one item on your list.
Yep. And how do you try to run these conversations? Like, what is the tactical steps? Do you ask them to use the product in front of you? Do you immediately go into like, what are your top problems? How do you kind of extract out this list of problems?
Yeah. I start by explaining the process to them. Hey, this is going to be an interview. It's conversational. You can stop and start whenever you want. You can interrupt me. The most important thing is that I find out how you use the product and where you might have challenges. Are there any areas of the product that you know you have challenges and that's where we should start? And let them talk about the things they don't like, because, that's what you're there for. And I would do that first. And then if there are specific workflows, now you could frame the whole interview in terms of specific workflows. You can say, hey, we're going to talk only about order entry today, or only about balancing the books today, or whatever it is. And within that context, let them kind of go freely. And if they don't know what to do, then you can guide them on, hey, just show me how you start the process.
Okay, got it. It reminds me a lot of how at Epic Games, our go-to testing method for everything was bring people into our gameplay lab, because these are unreleased versions of the game that we don't want anybody else to know about. Have them sign an NDA and then just watch them play.
Right. And you'll see the problems. You'll hear them talk about them, and you'll hear opportunities for improving the product.
And we used to always bring our designers with us, because those are the people building the interface. Do you typically want your designers on these calls or these?
I'm okay. I'm okay if there is one extra person on the call with me. What I don't want is too big of an audience that might make the interviewee become a little more shy, right? Not everybody is as outgoing as product managers are. And so somebody who, works in a back office somewhere and they're used to just dealing with the information on their PC, if they feel like there's 2, 3, 4 people on a call, their shyness might kick in and you won't get as good answers. But having one extra guest on there, I think, is certainly reasonable. I do think you talked specifically about a UX designer. I think that our goals are slightly different, product manager versus UX designer, right? I want to find what are the problems. I think of a UX designer as being the expert in solving the problem, right? Meaning if somebody is having trouble with a flow, I am not an expert on improving the flow, but the UX designer is. And so we both need to understand the problem. We need to understand it in slightly different ways. And so I'm okay with them being in my interviews. I'd like to go to some of their interviews, and I think it's okay for us to interview separately.
And another thing I like is some of these modern research tools. So there's a variety of platforms these days like Zeta and Dovetail. And what they do is they basically record your chat. Using AI, they'll pull out the key clips and they'll create a summary for you. And then you can just kind of edit that summary and share it out with your designer so you don't overwhelm people with, oh my gosh, right, I have 5 people interviewing me.
Yeah. Also remember, I agree completely. I used one of those for the first time years ago. I'm trying to remember what video conferencing product it was that had this. They didn't even call it AI back then. It was just, an assistant that would summarize your meeting. And so I think it's super valuable.
Yeah, I think the oldest one out there is called Gong, which was originally used for sales teams, but it's really effective for user research as well. And all of the user research tools, Sprig, everybody else, they're going to start coming up with these functionalities. So I think it's really important to use those. What are the biggest mistakes product managers make in these user conversations?
I think it's the same problem. They want to hear about potential solutions. And I think that users or customers are the wrong people to ask for solutions. You occasionally find customers who have a great idea for a new feature or a great idea for improving a feature. But I think that's the 1% in my experience. I've only talked to 10,000 customers, so I don't know if I have good enough experience. But I find that people are really good and really precise and really clear about telling you what bothers them. But they are not as good at solving the problem. And it's not their fault. Imagine they can only think about the product in the ways that they use it and in the scope that they use. But if they say, I want a button that combines step 2 and 3 of this process, in my mind, I think, what if we eliminated the process? What if we automated the whole thing? What if you never had to look up that information again? And they can't quite conceive that because they're thinking in terms of the flow that they're used to.
Yeah, they can't understand the workflows behind the scenes or the potential of the technology, so it's better to just anchor on the problem. And one of the most important steps you've mentioned when we've talked about this is this note-taking and summarization process to kind of share out that you've done the work and synthesize the insights for your team and your executives. Can you walk us through how you like to do that?
Yeah, I believe that once you get into this habit of interviewing and surveying, you should make that process very, very structured. All the way from sending out the same initial emails to the sales team, same exact content and format of the email, all the way through the end where you've gathered your pain points, you've identified your priorities, and you're now going to inform all of your internal constituents. That's a 3 to 4 or 5 slide PowerPoint that should always look exactly the same. So everybody knows what to expect after you've been out to visit users. So I think the interview process specifically, I'm okay with people taking, freehand notes on not a form, just on paper. That's how I do it. But if you're not comfortable or if you're new to the process, my book includes some forms, and one of them is just a way of remembering to talk about, for pain point number 1, identify the type of user who has the problem, identify the point in the process, in which process they're in, and the point in the process where they're having that problem, and then identify what the problem is. And it's all just writing freehand or typing freehand, but I think it's important to know all of those data elements for each pain point that you identify. So when you go back and talk with your team about solving the problem, you don't have to remember exactly where they were after you've talked to 10 or 20 people.
Okay. And let's move on to the user survey, because I feel like this is a tool that a lot of people, they actually underrate. At this point, it's like a humble tool. It's like something that most people, they just say, okay, I've done the user conversations. Oftentimes what I hear is kind of a rule of thumb is like, as soon as you start hearing the same answers from people, stop doing the user conversations. Okay, that's it. I'm going to go present this to executives. But as you've alluded to, right, you don't get then that authority of like, I've prioritized this with 100 of our top customers. So I think you need to do this survey, but most people just aren't even experienced with like the time and place, how to reach out to customers, what the survey request looks like, whether you're putting a monetary incentive in there for them to respond. So what are all the details and tactical steps to get people started?
Sure. So the survey needs to be super easy. That's why I like a drag and drop kind of rank order. I've used SurveyMonkey in the past. I know there are many different survey tools you can use, depending on whether you need a free one or whether you want to use a paid version, whether you want to build something. I'm building one. But the most important thing is that the survey be really easy for a person to respond to. You already know that the people you spoke to, who are a certain persona in your user audience, you already know they care about these things. So now you're going to reach out to, a few hundred other people with the same persona. It might be the same user role, might be some other way you define personas for your product. You're going to reach out to others and you're going to invite them to take the survey. I think the survey should be simple, like, do you perform this function in the product? If yes, we're going to take you to the next question. And then as quickly as possible, I would never send out a survey with more than 5 separate questions. And my preferred survey is the question that I said before, which says, are you right for this survey? And if so, drag and drop these pain points in the right order, most painful at the top. And if you can't do drag and drop because you're not using a sophisticated tool, that's fine too. You can identify them, put number fields next to them and mark them as 1 through 10, number 1 being the most painful. That works fine too. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that you get back at least 100 so you can justify your position with executives. And you have this big valid set of data. And so you know that you didn't base your decisions on just 3 or 5 or even 10 people.
The future of marketing is word of mouth. Turn your users and partners into your most valuable growth channel with podcast partner Cello. Cello is the only all-in-one solution to engage your most passionate users and partners to refer your product with just a few clicks. Best of all, Cello is directly embedded into your product and handles everything from referral payments to tax and compliance. And it runs on autopilot, so you can focus on scaling and building your own product. Here's how it works. First, within just a few hours, Cello integrates with your product and existing tools to automate all manual work. In your dashboard, you can then set up your referral campaign, define the reward details, and make the referral experience your own. After the program goes live, Cello continuously analyzes and scales its performance based on AI-generated recommendations. Plus, you only pay for successful. Go give it a try for free and learn more about user-led growth at cello.so/product growth.
Got it. Can you share a particularly memorable survey and how it influenced the problems you prioritized?
So, okay. So I'm not even going to say the company. So I was product manager for a product that had a challenging launch because we were unclear to our users about how much configuration was going to be necessary for this new product. People assumed it was going to require no configuration, but it was in terms of how much work it took to get the thing working for your particular company, it took almost the same amount of work as our previous product. There were other big advantages, but that was kind of the same. And so once it got launched, we went out and we started talking with customers, and we found that people were really stressed about that. And because it was unclear to them during the sales process. Most memorable, I have had 2 customers cry in front of me. One of them was crying because she had recommended to her company to buy this product, and they did. And now she thought she was going to lose her job because of that decision. So clearly we provided additional help to her and to some other people who were struggling with some of the configuration issues. The other one, though, was when I first got into product, I made another customer cry, but she was crying with happiness, like literal tears, because she had been using an old DOS-based program, and she had laminated both sides of a piece of paper. It took 2 pages of instructions for her to run her monthly billing every month. And this process, she said, "Hey, can you come over? I'm ready to do my first monthly billing on the new product." I went over. She said, "So what do I do?" I said, "Go to the billing tab." Great. Put in your date range. Great. Click the big orange button. And she clicked it, and letters and envelopes started printing out of her printer automatically for all the bills she had to send out to various teams. And so we turned like a 8-hour process into a 5-minute process, and she was crying with happiness. So anytime you get a customer to have that kind of positive emotion or negative emotion, unfortunately, about your product, that's a really great day.
So those were in the user interviews. What about the surveys? How did they change, like, what problems you prioritized?
Sure. So a problem, you remember, I'm not in the target audience. So I might think a problem is really important, but the people who use the product every day are the ones that matter. And so you send out a survey, and you're going to use a weighted average to rank order the products when the information comes back, right? How many people voted this item as number one? How many voted it as number two? Add all that up. And so I'm often surprised, and that's okay because I'm not the user. You're usually not terribly surprised. If you think something's number one, it's usually in the top three. It's very rare that the thing you think is frivolous ends up being number one. But having that precision of knowing for sure that representatives of your real audience said this is number one versus number four, that can be, number one to number four on a customer satisfaction feature, that might be a 3-month difference, 6-10 sprints before you get to number four. So it's important to have them rank ordered correctly and ranked by the people who are going to use the product.
Okay, so now let's translate what we've learned from these conversations and these surveys into our prioritized backlog. Obviously, we can't just take the problems as the users have given them because they don't think about like how much work the solution would take. They don't necessarily have any solution exploration baked in yet. And also, there'll probably be some problems lower in the list that you can just solve with like a little bit of work. So they might still make sense for prioritization. So how do you go from these prioritized list of problems to this is our prioritized backlog?
Sure. So those are the same kind of conversations that I think every team has with their dev, QA, and design team, right? Those are those internal the grooming sessions that you have every sprint. And I hope everybody's working in sprints by now. I know they're not, but I wish they all were. So I think those conversations are fun because that's the solutioning, right? We're not walking in there and telling development that we need a feature that does this. We're walking in and we're saying, we need to solve this problem. And that's really the fun part of creation, right? Is that nobody's dictating to the team what kind of solution they have to come up with. You might have constraints because of the type of product you have, but in general, developers, UX, even QA, they love to solve problems. They're all smart people. They all love to come up with something creative and make it work. In terms of the second, so those conversations I think are fun as long as, you moderate them, make sure everybody gets a say and try to come out of there with a solution that everybody thinks is the nice balance between complexity and time versus solving the problem for the end users. As far as quick wins, you mentioned there are going to be some that are going to be really small. I've never had a sprint where all the features in the sprint were the same size. And certainly the skill set of your developers is not the same from developer to developer. So in every sprint, you need some big complex or confusing issue. You need something that takes a particular technology to implement. And then you need some that your newer, less experienced developers are going to be comfortable getting out there and keep everybody busy because that's part of your other job. Keep everybody busy, fully employed, making progress, and improving the product as fast as we can. So I think there's opportunity for all size features. And of course, remember that these customer satisfaction features, which I call this whole category, are not the only thing your dev team does. They're working on infrastructure, and then we will have strategic initiatives coming from the business that will result in kind of roadmap features that we have to deal with too.
So how do you organize those 3 buckets of work? How do you recommend PMs kind of negotiate the chaos here? Sometimes, in engineering-driven orgs, it might just be like there's too much focus on infrastructure, or in leadership-driven orgs, there might just be too much focus on strategic bets. How do you make sure that between those you balance out? And then, of course, we get these customer satisfaction features as well.
So I think one of the benefits of being new to a team or new to an org is that you can frame a lot of process change in terms of, hey, I want to see how this is going to work. I'm new. I want to see how this is going to work with the team. And so I think we all kind of know that we should work in those three buckets and we should make progress in those three buckets, strategic but as you said, teams get into a pattern of what they focus on. So I think, and this is, everybody can choose their own, but I like to say, let's just do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for a sprint or two and see how we're doing, right? Because there are teams where the infrastructure stuff gets pushed aside and only gets worked on when it's an emergency because the license on that particular supporting software is about to end next week. So suddenly we have to do a short sprint and an emergency release, and you don't want to get there. So I like doing a third, for maybe, a couple of sprints. That's only a month. It's fine. And then you can see the workload that comes in from the three different points of view and try to come up with a balance. It's all in negotiation at that point, right? We want to make sure we're delivering good products to customers and improving them, supporting our business executive decisions, and keeping the product performant and bulletproof.
Okay, so as you're negotiating these three buckets, you probably need like some sort of sizing of the solution. How do you try to what is your best favorite way for going from, we've agreed on this, whether it's strategic initiative or customer satisfaction problem or infrastructure problem, to this is how much engineering and designing effort will be needed so you can make those trade-off decisions to create that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 split?
I don't care how it gets sized. I do care that the development team and the QA teams understand the problem to be solved and the solution that we all came up with. And then when they go to size it, it's not me. Why should I tell somebody else how long it takes to do their work when I'm not an expert in their area? So, I've used lots of processes. We use planning poker, we use whatever. But in the end, I just want the development team to be comfortable that they gave an estimate that they believe in, and the same for QA, same for everybody else. And then I'll watch the statistics from sprint to sprint on what did we estimate and how close was our estimate. And I know this sounds a little tricky, but I don't ever bring up if the estimates are continuously off from the actual delivery time, unless it's way, way off. But, if it's off by 15% and they're consistently either over or underestimating by 15%, but they still pick up extra work in the sprint, and so they're still productive, I'll just keep that as a factor in my head. So when they say it's going to take this many points or this many hours to do, I'll say, oh, I need to add 15% to that, or I need to deduct 15% for that. And I don't want them to start thinking too hard about how they estimate. I want estimates they believe in. And then if we have to have a fudge factor in there to account for that, that's fine.
Okay, so that's one side of the quantitative analysis that people typically do, is sizing. The other is straight up quantitative analysis around the features, because we've talked about all these qualitative reasons to prioritize a feature, but there might be quantitative ones. So at places I've worked at, like a firm, they go so far as to estimate, the conversion, the revenue, the profit uplift for every single feature that they might look at. And then at places like Apollo, we would present those to the CEO, who would then look at, the sizing estimate and the revenue estimate, and he would himself kind of decide our final roadmap. What is your take on this sort of quantitative modeling? Sometimes it's even very hard to do. Should you be doing it when it's possible?
I think trying it and seeing if your estimates end up being valid or near valid, great. But I have a feeling that process is often going to result in the same kind of answers you get if you ask customers for feature requests instead of pain points. Because, and I understand the revenue challenge, right? Of course, you don't want to invest money into working on a feature if it's not going to drive whatever your metrics are. But if you know that people want it, and you know that people want a particular kind of improvement or change to your product, then it's going to benefit. Now, how do you weigh that if you don't trust that just the users wanting it is important? And I can see why. So imagine, users and customers are not the same thing when you're selling to businesses. So the person who uses your accounting software is not the VP of finance who authorized the $300,000 sale of the software. So your executives and your sales team want to please that customer. And your product has to please the users. So I certainly understand the point of view of wanting to make sure that customers are happy and that we increase sales and revenue. But I would just say that if the statistics can be validated by going through that process once or twice and seeing if prioritizing in a way that accounts for the is it a guess at revenue, the revenue uplift? If that plays out, then maybe the team has identified some quantifiable way of doing that. I think I don't know if that's going to be valid. I mean, you can survey how many customers want that new thing. That seems kind of as good as it's going to get, I think.
Yeah, it's about going as close to the source quality data and not just adding in sort of a model that might not be as effective on top of it. Okay, so we've covered knowing your user. We've talked about how to turn that into your roadmap. I hope that everybody walks away with a lot of tactical next steps from George's 20 plus years of experience. And that's where I want to shift to next. You started in product management all the way back in 2000. How have you seen the field shift since then?
Yep. Well, it was not a profession back then. I mean, it was not a profession certainly out here on the East Coast. I think that product management, as we know it, developed in the software business, and that developed out west. I think there were major changes to how product management works as teams started to go with agile methodology, working in sprints. Because if you think about it, when your production team, whatever that is, making furniture, making software, is working in a continuous process and is working in a continuous process and on kind of an undefined timeline, meaning no end, just continuous work. That's very different, and you have to plan for that very differently than if you have beginnings and end of the work. And what I mean by that is, if you're working in sprints, your dev team needs new work every 2 weeks, and it should be the most important work, which means that on the product management side, you have to understand all the business priorities. You have to understand the user pains. You have to understand the technical improvements that might need to be made and what the priorities are for all of those things right now, not 3 months from now. You need to know right now because you have to get work in the pipeline for your at least $500,000 a year software team. And so it's important that in this modern sprint-based environment, the pace of understanding your audience and bringing a set of work to the team, it's fast and it's continuous and there is no end to it. So the only thing you can do is get ahead of it. It's very rare instances where I've found you get in trouble for having a bigger set of validated needs. So instead of trying to be 1 sprint ahead or 2 sprints ahead, it's one of the benefits of doing the quarterly interviews. You can be as much as 3 months ahead with work ready to fill in the gaps between the strategic features.
If that's how PM has evolved till now, what is your forecast for the next 20 years?
Well, are you aware of this AI thing people keep talking about? I don't
Haven't
know if
heard of
everybody's
it.
heard about it yet. So I think that creating and formatting and delivering documentation requirements of various types, let's say, is going to become highly automated. What doesn't change is that people are using software. People have challenges. We want to know about the challenges, and we want to prioritize those challenges so that we work on the right thing. I also think that companies are going to try to use AI to interview people. And I don't think it's going to work. And the reason I say that is that for the same reason why someone would rather talk to a real psychologist instead of a piece of software that is asking you all the same follow-up questions. People who are talking about their problems want to know that the person on the other end of the phone or in the WebEx or sitting next to them is empathizing with those problems and taking them seriously. And so I think there will be a period of time where companies try to automate a lot of interviews. And I think that it will come back around. That is, as long as we still have people using our products, then they are going to be more open and more forthcoming when the person asking the questions of them is a person. And I think that's where we need to focus. And it's one of the reasons that my book focuses a lot on interviewing and surveying and interacting with people, because I'm not saying I'm prescient or anything, but as many of our tasks get automated by AI, I think the one thing that we'll be able to hold on to and be better at is the personal emotional connection with the users of our customers. And boy, wouldn't it be great if you could eliminate half your meetings and almost all of your documentation and farm that out to AI just by talking to the AI or giving them a handful of, unrelated notes and they figure out what to do with it. And that the requirements that end up going over to the dev team, whether that's humans or humans plus AI doing the development, those requirements are pristine and include every single, comma and period that the receivers would expect, because AI is formatting it perfectly every time. And never forgetting supporting requirements, never forgetting that we have a design guide and that you don't have to put all the design elements in the story because it's referencing the design guide. All of that kind of thing, I think is going to improve the process around documentation and communication flow. Product managers need to hold on to their relationships with the people.
100%. The people part of product management doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. Now I want to shift into careers. One of the most interesting things about your career is you are the embodiment of the super IC. Everybody's been talking about the super IC, right, for the last year or two. But usually we're talking about super ICs with 10 or 12 years of experience, not 24. First of all, what encouraged you to make the super IC decision versus the leadership track decision? And then second of all, like for people pondering that decision, who are the right types of people who that career track could work for?
Sure. It had a lot to do with where I was working at the time. By the time I got fairly skilled at product management, I was moving into LabCorp, where I stayed for 13 years. And while LabCorp is a large organization, 30,000 employees, more than that now, they had a small product management team. There were 3 product lines, so there were 3 product leads, and that's it. And that's kind of that. When I got hired, they were managers. At some point, they eventually made those directors. But they all reported up to a vice president, who reported up to the CIO, who reported to the CEO. So the structure was shallow. And then there were product teams under each of those product lines. Well, I got to do fun things, meaning I got recruited in there to create this software that doctors and their teams use to order tests and get results. And that was kind of creating from scratch, and it was super fun. And I started with 6 product analysts working for me, not even reporting to me at that point. I was brand new at the company, but I would have a 1-hour meeting with each of them every day as we tried to define the features that were going to go into this V1 of this product we were building. So I would sit in an office. They would take turns coming in. I said, what are you working on? What problems do you have? And we would work through them, and I'd give them some instruction to go on and take next steps and follow up the next day. And I worked that way for about a year, and it was intense, but so fun. And so as that product matured a little, we started creating products for insurers that we worked with. And my boss at the time, Mark Wright, great guy, he said, hey, do this, do the insurance, do the payer product line. And we were able to create a couple of different products over there that the insurers needed, primarily information exchange and data exchange and looking up historical lab results for either populations or individuals. And so it was fun, so there's another few years. And then we had a subsidiary company get created, and they're like, hey, they need some product help over there. So I went over and I spent a number of years with that subsidiary. And so, I'd have probably made more money had I worked hard on moving up the chain, changing companies and moving to director and VP positions. But honestly, product manager, where you're deciding what's going into a product, and if you can defend those decisions and the executives and others are saying, yes, we agree, you have good rationale, it's just the most fun job. I mean, where else do you get to make stuff up? Smart people build it. It's out there in front of tens of thousands or more people. And by and large, they like it. I mean, how many jobs are that cool? So I like the job.
And you've also managed to nab positions in different industries that a lot of people are struggling with, as we talked about at the beginning. What is your job search style? How do you do that? How do you manage to switch industries successfully?
I'm not great at it, but I think part of it, because I've had a long career, I'm not always looking for a job, right? And so I'm typically not looking for a job when the economy and the job market is tight. That's part of it. I mean, ideally, you should choose when you leave a company. Now, that's not always the case. You don't get along with your boss, or you're having or there's, family issues, whatever. A lot of issues can affect where you work and when you work there. But if you have the freedom to choose when you change, then keep your great job, do a great job at that great job, and look for your next position while you're employed, and pick a period of time where there are not 600 applicants going for every product management position. Because I understand how it is right now. I took time off starting in November. I'm a little different because I'm late career and I have money in the bank, and I'm not urgently figuring out how to pay bills. So I think that's the key, though, is time it.
Get the timing right? Like 3 years ago, it was really easy to get a PM job in a new industry. Even I was seeing people get up-leveled. They might have been a super IC for a while, and somebody just takes a chance on them to go manage a team. So it seems like getting that timing portion, people need to deal with. Now, if they are stuck, they were laid off, I'm curious, Why did so many PMs get laid off? What do you think it was, and how can we make sure that like the people listening don't experience that again?
I think it was, I'll say what I know it is, and then I'll give a little bit of an opinion. So the economy, $10 trillion got dumped into the economy post-COVID, right? That money has to go somewhere. A lot of it went into the stock market, which means companies had cash. Big companies had bigger cash because more people bought their stock. The tech company stocks skyrocketed, and those companies had a lot of money. Well, when executives want to deploy capital, they're going to deploy it to try to increase productivity and increase production of their products and services. So in addition to hiring developers, they also needed to hire product teams. And so that's why it grew so quickly in that 2-year period. Now, as that money kind of washed through the system, interest rates went up, and the overall economic environment kind of, for lack of a better term, took cash out of the system. Teams started thinking, well, now we don't have quite as much money. I would imagine that some certainly big tech companies are thinking we're looking towards AI doing some work. So let's start paring down our teams. I don't know if that's really happening yet. That's my guess. But at the very least, there's just not as much money floating around, and therefore teams are getting tighter. So they're going to be looking for people they're laying people off. The people they're keeping have excellent qualifications and excellent results. And so I think that's how it's going to be for a little while till the economy makes its next adjustment.
Another thing I believe is what we talked about for the first hour and a half, which is that a lot of PMs weren't focused on prioritizing problems and getting to know their customers best. They were just working on project managing features that their executives handed to them.
Right. And as we know, that's going to be a problem because without the research, executives are not going to be right any more often than anyone else who's generally informed about the business. You know, they're not hearing the specific problems of users. I'd like to talk about that for just a second, if I could. So executives do hear about problems, right, from customers, but they don't hear directly. So imagine if it's and I'm talking specifically software for business users, but I think of it as like the whisper chain game you used to play when you were a little kid, right? So imagine if your company CEO, you're at a software vendor, your company CEO is about to meet with the big client CEO. The big client CEO is going to ask his senior VPs or his C-level whatevers, hey, what do you got for me to talk about with the vendor CEO? Is there any problems with the product? So the CPO will talk to the VP of product, will talk to the director of product, will talk to a manager of a team who's using that product, and the manager will go, hey, what problems do we have? CEO is going to fix that up for us. And somebody will say, oh, well, when I do this, it does this, and I'd really love it if it didn't do that. And that message goes back up through the 5 layers and then comes across to the vendor CEO and goes down 5 layers to the product manager. And it happens all the time. And certainly as problems like that are relayed down the chain, we've talked about it earlier today, those tend to be taken seriously and sometimes just resolved with no more information than that. But the right thing to do as the product manager is, can I talk to the person who had the problem? Get the real deal, solve the real problem. Even if you don't then go and prioritize it, at least you understand what the problem was that needs to be solved. It may be something you already know. I suggest going through the whole prioritization process, but you know what? If that whole line of executives on both sides really cares about that thing, and you come back and say, here's the exact description, we're putting it in X future release. Maybe just to keep the big customer happy, but at least you know you're solving the right problem.
Okay, so if there's one big takeaway for everyone listening from our conversation, be the expert in your problems of your users and be the authority on what the priority of those is. That's kind of the antidote to whatever's coming with AI, whatever's coming with a tenuous job market. And I hope we've given you some really good tactics to address that. Are you ready to move on to the lightning round, George?
Sure.
All right. What's your favorite hobby?
I like building things, physical things. I've renovated a house almost by myself, tore it down to the studs and rebuilt it. And I found that really fun. I've built some furniture, built some cabinets, things like that. So I like building almost anything, whether it's virtual software or physical goods.
Love it. What's your favorite interview question of product managers?
I think I like to ask, what's the difference between a user and a customer? Because if you don't know that, you need to learn it quickly, right? Customers pay, users use the product, and they are not always the same thing.
What's your favorite book that has lessons for product and growth people?
Yeah, so I have not worked as in a job that was titled Growth Product Manager before. So I've been reading Product Led by Wes Bush. I wanted to get like the primer from, I don't know, he sold like 700,000 copies. So I think it's a worthy book. Most of what I've been, rather than reading, I've been watching tons of videos on AI, right? Like what's going on with Anthropic, OpenAI. I like watching interviews with those guys because I really want to understand what's coming, and AI is coming.
What's your favorite newsletter that you anticipate hitting your inbox?
I like yours. And that's not just pandering. I like yours because you always include a graphic. And I like that I can read the first sentence and look at the graphic and decide if that's a topic for me, and then go drill down on it. And there was, I can't remember what it was. There was one just in the last 10 days that I thought was really great and super helpful to me. But I think keep doing that.
Those graphics take a lot of time, so I'm glad that somebody likes them. What's something very few people know about you?
Very few people know that I am currently building an app, even though I know nothing about coding. I'm using bubble.io. I'm going to build an app for product managers. Hope to have it out for pilot in about a month. And it'll help people. I know this is going to sound crazy, but it'll help product managers follow a good process for interviewing and surveying.
Nice. Right up your alley. What product feature or product are you most proud of shipping?
We made at LabCorp, we made a product for insurance companies called LabCorp Payer. And the problem was that the kind of database interface we gave to insurance companies to look up lab results. So it's like, let's say I want to find all of my covered members who have had a diabetes A1C test in the last quarter. They need this information to report up to the government and for other reasons. And we had a kind of clumsy process for them. So my intention was to interview 10 customers, 10 users of the old product. I got to 7 and didn't interview anymore because all 7 explained the exact same problem, that they wanted a simple interface to just find me all the people that meet this criteria. But because of the way insurance works and because of the way medical records sometimes move around between constituents, it was hard to get that. And they found themselves searching 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ways. So when I started building the product, the CIO asked me in every one of our weekly status meetings, this is kind of a high priority product, weekly status meetings, are you going to include all the features from the older product? And I would say, no. And he never asked a follow-up. Now, he's a smart guy, so I knew he had a strategy with continuing to ask me. In the end, we released it, and about 2 weeks later, we get a message, an unsolicited message through the salesperson from our primary constituent at United Healthcare, right? Biggest insurance company in the country. And he said, this is great. We were able to find X percentage, which was a super high percentage of all of the results that we were looking for. It's exactly what we expected to see. And it took a 5-minute search. And so when you can please your customer so much that the user's boss's boss sends a note over to the company saying unsolicited and says, this is great. It's doing exactly what we needed. That's a really good day.
That's like what every builder dreams of. What's a new product you've started using and enjoy?
What's the latest thing I started using? Oh, Bubble. So there are challenges in learning how to configure and use the right language in Bubble to make your workflow work and pull data correctly. But it is really interesting. After 20-something years in software, and I purposely never learned to code because I didn't want to compete with developers on ideas on how to implement. I'm now able to build this app with very little assistance. And like I said, hopefully it'll be out next month.
Cool. What commonly held belief or saying do you disagree with?
Customer's always right.
Say more.
The customer is only right in terms of the result they want. They're not right in how to get there. It's up to us to help them get there.
All right. Last serious question. What's one product failure that you learned from?
So the product that I talked about before that made a customer cry with sadness, not happiness, right? What I found is that the communication about exactly what you're going to provide in terms of a feature or a product has to be crystal clear and it has to be complete. The information about our piece of software was clear and complete. The information around what was needed to configure and support that software was incomplete. And it caused a lot of pain for customers. It caused a lot of pain for us to get it all straightened out. So I think communicate early, often, and openly with everyone on your team and everyone beyond your team.
We all have those failures, but it's about the learning. Where can people find you online and how can they help you?
So George Harter on LinkedIn, go there. There's also georgeharter.com, but I post on LinkedIn, so there's more information there. And then how can they help me? Well, because I enjoy mentoring, because I enjoy working on software products, in addition to doing my own thing, I also do some consulting. I'd love to work with more small business who are trying to find product market fit or trying to organize their product workflow. I think I can help.
All right. If you're a founder, check him out for consulting help. And if you're a PM, check out his book, Build a Better Product Manager. George, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Akash. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.